You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Tuesday, December 10th. I'm Jamaris Perez.
And I'm Sadia Rafiquddin. Doctors are using social media to endorse products. Some are against this practice, while others have given up on fighting it.
I don't think it matters if I would ideally say doctors should not sponsor products because it's going to happen.
The holidays are upon us, and so are Christmas lights. But the seasonal decor comes with an unintended consequence.
We're aware of a lot of environmental problems, but light pollution is one of those that escapes notice.
A bill proposed in New York State would make time off from school for mental illness an excused absence. If passed, the law could help students with anxiety and depression.
There's been times where I finish a presentation and I need to leave the room right away because I'm going to start crying.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Donald Trump faces 2 articles of impeachment for allegedly encouraging a foreign government to interfere in the 2020 presidential election in his dealings with Ukraine. The president is anticipating that he will be cleared of the charges in an impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate, where Republicans are in control, and a 2/3 majority is required to impeach. NPR's Franco Ordonez has more on President Trump's reaction today.
President Trump took to Twitter and declared it was sheer political madness to impeach a president who has done nothing wrong, while the White House expects him to be fully exonerated in a Senate impeachment trial. Democratic leaders announced they would move forward on 2 articles of impeachment, charging the president with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham accused Democrats of, quote, forcing unfounded accusations down the throats of the American people. She said House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leaders will ultimately have to answer to their own constituents. Franco Ordonez, NPR News, the White House.
Shortly after making the somber announcement, House Democrats pivoted. They and organized labor are throwing their support behind an updated version of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which President Trump has long criticized as a job killer for the U.S. NPR's Scott Horsley reports a vote on the House floor could come as early as next week.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is backing the trade deal. Her announcement came just an hour after she unveiled articles of impeachment against President Trump. Pelosi says she and her fellow Democrats signed on to the deal after securing enforceable protections for labor and the environment and stripping out a provision that might have locked in lengthy patent protections for certain pharmaceuticals.
There is no question, of course, that this trade agreement is much better than NAFTA. It is infinitely better than what was initially proposed by the administration.
President Trump also celebrated the agreement as good for farmers, manufacturers, and unions. The AFL-CIO signaled its support. Scott Horsley, NPR News.
On Thursday, New York City and Newark will head to court. Last night, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced New York will temporarily stop sending its homeless residents to Newark. They had been moved as part of a program that relocates homeless residents to cities across the country. The program is intended to help alleviate New York's homeless crisis. The decision comes after Newark Mayor Russ Baraka filed a lawsuit against New York City last week. He said the program placed undue stress on the Newark community. Today, building inspectors at a Brooklyn NYCHA complex discovered that hundreds of pounds of baby wipes were the cause of a major sewage spill last Friday. A broken pipe had caused an inch of raw sewage to fill the basement of the residential building. Over 200 residents at the Kingsborough houses in Crown Heights have already been without hot water since Thanksgiving weekend.
I could smell it under my kitchen sink. Feces. That's nasty.
The Brooklyn leak comes just a week after another sewage spill in Jamaica, Queens. Last night in New Jersey, a state assembly committee unanimously approved a bill banning discrimination based on hairstyle. The bill was first introduced over the summer after a high school referee gave a student wrestler an ultimatum: dreadlocks or wrestling. To go into effect, the bill must be passed by the full Assembly and State Senate and signed by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. This morning, organizers of SantaCon announced this year's bar crawl will begin at Rockefeller Center. Every year, the starting location is kept a secret until just a few days before. If you're in a rush to get somewhere in Midtown on Saturday morning, you may want to steer clear, as chaos often ensues. More on that later. If you're about to head out for lunch, bring your umbrella. There's heavy rain across the city. But you may want to leave your jacket behind. The current high is 56 degrees. Today's rain will turn to snow in the early morning. 1 to 2 inches will accumulate. Grace Goodwin, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Sadia Rafiquddin.
And I'm Damaris Perez. Starting Saturday, New Yorkers will be able to apply for a standard driver's license or permit regardless of their citizenship status. That's when a new law, the Driver's License and Privacy Act, known as the Green Light Law, comes into effect. Andy Ayers is the director of the Government Law Center at Albany Law School, where he specializes in immigration law. I spoke with him about the new law and how it changes things for undocumented New Yorkers. Thanks for being here with us, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
So, what exactly is the Green Light Law?
The Green Light Law does two major things. One is it removes any restrictions on who can get a driver's license based on their immigration or citizenship status, which means if you're undocumented or if you're a lawfully present non-citizen, you can get a driver's license in New York State. It's not the same kind of driver's license you get if you're a citizen, in that it's not good for federal purposes. You can't get into an airport or a federal facility using this driver's license. But it will work for driving, and it will work for identification purposes in New York. The second major thing the law does is protect the privacy of drivers whose information is in the New York State databases from any access by federal immigration authorities.
Is that going to be just for undocumented New Yorkers who are submitting these forms for these driver's licenses?
The protections apply to everybody. And so when you apply for a driver's license, New York State is now prohibited from asking whether you're undocumented or not. So they can't apply the protections to only the undocumented. They don't know who is undocumented and who isn't.
Immigration is, of course, a very polarizing issue at this time. Could you lay out the conflict specifically surrounding the Green Light Law for our listeners?
In recent years, advocates for non-citizens have again begun to push for driver's licenses based on a couple of ideas. One is, of course, that it's much easier to be an undocumented person if you're able to drive to doctor's appointments and jobs and so forth. And that's precisely what opponents of the bill objected to. Another argument that the advocates made was that the state would benefit from having licensed undocumented drivers because of the fact that people drive anyway.
You mentioned briefly some of the benefits of the Green Light Law. Can we just kind of go into that more specifically for New Yorkers starting this Saturday?
One of the important things about the Green Light Law is that its impact will be felt particularly significantly upstate, even though there are far fewer undocumented immigrants non-state. The vast majority of those are in New York City and Long Island. But of course, New York City has excellent public transportation, and upstate New York doesn't, which means that the ability to drive has a bigger impact on people who are outside of the New York City area. You also are seeing a significant political impact upstate. County clerks who are elected at the county level, not appointed by the state, but county clerks in rural areas are the people who actually give you a driver's license. Some of those county clerks are strongly opposed to the law and have filed lawsuits opposing it. Those lawsuits are proceeding through the courts. One has been dismissed. 2 others are still pending.
I think it's very interesting to talk about how this, as a state law, will be enforced at the local level. And you touched a lot on how that affects the role of, as you mentioned, county clerks as well. What is the state doing to prepare municipalities before the law goes into effect this week?
Municipalities are still waiting for guidance from the state DMV on some of the important procedural details about how this law should be implemented. I think it's going to be important to see some of those questions answered sooner rather than later.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on how this all plays out. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Andy.
Thanks again for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
The new Green Light Law comes in the wake of increased national pressure on immigrants. Earlier this year, the Trump administration introduced the public charge rule, which would prevent immigrants from receiving green cards or obtaining a visa if they are likely to use public benefits. White House officials argue these immigrants would be too dependent on the government. The policy was halted last month after 4 states, including New York, filed suit. But as reporter Eric He finds, advocates believe the proposal is still stirring fear among immigrant communities.
On a wall in the lobby of the office of the Chinese American Planning Council in Chinatown are 4 large posters. Each has large font, all caps. One reads, "Know your rights." Another, "It is safe to enroll and remain on your benefits." The signs are meant for immigrants who are worried about their status. They think they are a public charge.
Really, what is both so smart and so cruel about it is that the rule never had to go into effect for it to do what it intended to do.
More likely than not, their fears are mistaken. But Carlin Cowan, who works with the council, says the damage has already been done.
The rule was intending to either A, separate families, or B, push people into the shadows and deprive them of the benefits and the programs and the support that they need to survive. And it's successfully doing that without ever being passed.
The proposed policy hit New York's Asian community especially hard. Since the policy was announced, enrollment in SNAP declined 11% for Asian non-citizens, as opposed to a 2% decline for citizens. Nearly 2/3 of Asian Americans in the city have limited English proficiency, and advocates say there is also a general distrust from the community because they are unfamiliar with the difference between federal and local governments. Cowan described an older immigrant with a chronic condition who came into the office scared, asking to disenroll from Medicare that she needed for prescriptions because her daughter was applying for a green card.
This was someone that genuinely was ready to give up prescriptions that she needed to live and be healthy because of that fear of how it would impact her and her family.
To have to choose between healthcare and wanting to become an American and go without healthcare for fear of being deported or for fear of not being able to eventually get your green card is a terrible thing.
Sean Rahman is a staff attorney at CUNY Citizenship Now, another local immigrant advocacy group. Rahman saw a rush of people come into his office to either disenroll from benefits like Medicare or to speed up their immigration status.
Everybody is scared they cannot make it through the process.
Shuizhen Ye lives in Chinatown. She and her husband became permanent residents in 2000 when their daughter petitioned for them as family members. They are examples of immigrants who wouldn't have been given green cards if Trump's policy was the law back then. They are both over 80 with health problems and speak little English. Ye has friends overseas who are holding off on applying. Neither them nor Cowan's clients agreed to be interviewed, even under anonymity. Cowan believes this is another indication of fear from the policy. As for the immigrant who approached Cowan, she eventually convinced the client to stay on Medicare. However, on Thursday, a federal appeals court lifted 2 lower court injunctions against the rule. The policy is still blocked because it did not apply to 2 other nationwide injunctions. But the legal uncertainty means fear over the policy could drag on. Eric He, Columbia Radio News.
A new program called Project Reset is helping to decrease the number of people with a criminal record. The program attempts to provide a more proportional response to low-level crime. Project Reset first began in Brooklyn and later expanded to Manhattan. Its newest branch is located in the Bronx. Reporter Sadia Rafiquddin brings us the story.
When a person is accused of a minor, non-violent offense like shoplifting or trespassing, they get a desk appearance ticket. That means they're not taken to jail in handcuffs, but do have to appear in court. That's where Project Reset comes in. Jennifer Peterson oversees it in the Bronx.
Now we reach out to those folks, let them know that they can come do a program with us and have their case declined to prosecute. So it's as if their case never existed.
That's Peterson. After a desk appearance ticket is issued, the local prosecutor's office will determine if the accused is eligible for Project Reset. If so, they will be recommended to Peterson's team. If the accused completes the program, their record is wiped clean.
The biggest sort of gift and second chance we can provide is that it's a fresh start.
In the Bronx, the accused participate in restorative justice circles. The circles are inspired by Native American traditions of repairing the harm caused by crime.
The whole point is for people not to be punished or feel shame for what they did, but have a chance to reconnect with people in their community, other people who are also here for the same reason.
Volunteers that work or live in the Bronx become trained community members that sit in the restorative justice circle with the accused. Both community members and the accused have productive conversations about their lives. The offenders talk about the circumstances of their arrest with the goal of reflecting and taking accountability for their actions.
One of them started, just crying about how she was looking for a job. She was unemployed at the time and how she didn't feel confidence to get back out there. And, she received encouragement from another woman in the circle.
These moments in the circle can bring new opportunities for the accused participants.
There was one participant who was a driver, and there was a community member who was a truck driver and had experience in that area and said, let's connect after. I may have some opportunities for you.
Once participants complete the program, the charge is removed from their record, which helps with employment and housing prospects. They also benefit from new relationships that were formed in the program.
They can build those connections and hopefully hang on to them, long after the arrest and long after they finish the program.
Peterson says the impact of Project Reset is felt by the accused, the volunteer community members, and the program staff.
And it felt like my job is bearing witness and holding those stories to light.
Since Project Reset was established 4 years ago, it has helped almost 2,000 participants avoid court and a permanent criminal record. Project Reset has a 98% completion rate. The next branch will open in Staten Island in 2020. Sadia Rafiquddin, Columbia Radio News.
A level offense the MTA is eager to crack down on, turnstile jumping. The MTA estimates that it lost $215 million to fare evasion last year. The response was to hire an additional 500 police officers to patrol the subways and buses. But this decision garnered intense pushback from transit activists.
The Citizens Budget Commission estimates the increased enforcement will cost the MTA $56 million in the first year alone, with annual costs expected to increase thereafter. However, a new program to offer half-price fares to low-income New Yorkers could help reduce fare evasion. Ian Hodgson reports.
A well-jumped turnstile is a thing of beauty, and Dee's form is impeccable. His hands grasp the posts on either side of the turnstile, a quick hop brings his knees to his chest, and with a twist of the hips he is over. Dee won't tell me his full name, only his first initial, but when I ask why he jumped the turnstile at the 137th Street station, he says it's because he couldn't afford the $2.75 to get a pass. This is a common problem, says Harold Stoppler, a professor of transit economics at Columbia University. In a recent survey, Stoppler found that nearly 1/3 of low-income New Yorkers struggled to pay transit fares.
We found that that's one of the most common economic hardships that low-income New Yorkers face. And so something's got to give, right? And that's where, unfortunately, some New Yorkers feel like they don't have a choice but to try to get through without paying.
And it's this decision to hop turnstiles that the MTA is cracking down on. On a frigid Friday evening last month, hundreds of New Yorkers gathered in central Harlem to protest the increased police presence on the MTA. Almost immediately, the crowd was surrounded by police. Undeterred, the mix of stern-faced activists, giddy college students, and black-clad anarchists began their march. Puffs of hot breath rose in the cold evening air as they chanted, and one young protester says that the MTA has the problem of fare evasion all wrong.
To so violently crack down on hopping the turnstile on the subway when most people are literally only hopping the subway because they can't afford it and they're trying to go to work or they're trying to get to the hospital or whatever it is.
How then should the MTA stop fare evaders? Simple, the activists say. You can't evade a fare that doesn't exist, so make the trains free.
Free from the A to the Z, public transit should be free. From the A to the Z, public transit should be free.
Transit experts say that this solution is, unrealistic. But the city currently offers half-price fares to nearly 94,000 low-income New Yorkers through a program called Fair Fares. And starting in January 2020, the program will be expanded to all 1.7 million New Yorkers who live at or below the poverty line. The program was initially introduced to address economic inequality, but Harold Stoppler, who also helped craft the Fair Fares initiative, says lower fares might also alleviate the problem of evasion.
right? We want to make it easier for them to get through the turnstile by lowering the price of a MetroCard rather than using public resources to punish them for their economic need at the turnstile.
While the MTA has not made data available to see how fare fares has impacted fare evasion during the initial rollout, if Stoppler is right, we may see fare evasions drop in the near future without the need for more cops. Ian Hodgson, Columbia Radio News.
NYPD data shows that transit crime is on the rise, and in the last month, tensions have peaked between riders and police officers patrolling the subways. Now, another group is stepping in. The Guardian Angels says it has increased patrol efforts by 20% this year. For veteran commuters, their resurgence is a reminder of the New York crime at its worst. Janmaris Perez reports on what's new for the group and whether the red-clad vigilantes will actually make the MTA safer.
For many New Yorkers, seeing the Guardian Angels is a reminder of lingering crime. Matthew Hawkins has lived in Washington Heights for 12 years. He recalls how he felt during a recent sighting of a guardian angel on his commute.
It is a reminder that, crime has gone up significantly, I believe, since I've been a resident here, only in the past few weeks and months alone. And it's just, it's a sad reminder of how things have gotten to this point.
It's a sad reminder for Benjamin Garcia, too. He's the patrol director for the Guardian Angels and would rather see good people take back their community from crime.
We want to make sure that everyone is safe. The community belongs to the great people, doesn't belong to the gangs and to the negative people.
Garcia has been sporting his red beret and matching jacket since he joined the Guardian Angels in 1986. The look may be the same, but times have certainly changed. Garcia, along with the teenage volunteers he recruits, now carries with him an important crime-fighting tool, his cell phone.
Imagine if you broadcast that live on Facebook Live. Imagine. Everybody's going to see it. People think about it twice. Once they see that cell phone going up and they're acting in a way that they shouldn't be acting, they're being recorded, they think twice.
So, bad guys might think twice if they know they're being watched. But is it different than anyone else carrying a cell phone? To find out, I spoke to Dr. Dennis Kenny, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Dr. Kenny, who now lives in D.C., has been researching crime on the New York City subway since the 80s. In 1986, he published a study on the Guardian Angels' effectiveness in reducing crime and fear. Among the 6,000 riders he surveyed, here's what he found.
So in other words, if the Angels were riding on the train that I was on right now, I would feel like I was less likely to have something bad happen to me then. But the fact that the Angels were there didn't change my perception of how much risk I was at over the course of the next, say, year.
Even if it's a short impact, reducing fear is a good thing. But what about actually fighting crime? Are the new Guardian Angels, most of which are teenagers and young adults, prepared to hold down violence on your subway car?
What we found pretty consistently across the board was that the training was virtually non-existent. And so you've got young people, 16, 18, 20-year-olds, that are supposed to be in a crime-fighting role that have absolutely no preparation for what it is that they're doing or any of the implications of what they're doing.
Riding with a Guardian Angel might not get you front row seats to a crime-fighting brawl, but it is a symbol of solidarity during a time when New Yorkers are looking to feel safe. Janmaris Perez, Columbia Radio News. Young Muslims are one of the fastest-growing religious groups in the country. Here in New York, there's a new Muslim Students Association chapter at Columbia University's Medical Center.
On Fridays, members attend Islamic services called Jummah in Arabic. Like members of other religious groups on campus, they have access to a chapel, but as Hiba Ansari finds, many chapels aren't designed for Muslims.
Lena Demas recalls the first time she went to the Milstein Chapel for an Islamic Friday service. When she walked in, she was surrounded with white marble walls and abstract stained glass windows. Open to anyone of any faith, the chapel shows no sign, symbol, or statue that adheres to any one religion. But on Fridays, there was a problem.
It's nice that we have access to it, but that's not what we need.
Demas is a graduate student and board member of the Muslim Students Association at Columbia's Medical Center. The problem, the organization says, pews. Halil Bakaj is a president of the group.
Basically, it's your standard chapel. You have
up where I believe the preacher usually speaks.
Yeah.
And then you have your rows with seats kind of like, what?
Pews.
Pews, is that what they're called? Yeah. Is that the proper term?
That's right, pews. Most chapels aren't designed for Muslims. The chapel here is filled with rows of wooden pews that could seat over 100, but they take up a lot of space that Muslims need to pray during the Islamic Friday service, called Jummah in Arabic. Muslims sit on the floor while a preacher gives a sermon. When it's time to pray, they line up shoulder to shoulder. So Bikaj and his group are trying to reserve a new room, and Muslim groups across the country are also having to navigate through chapels for Friday service.
Muslims are still a minority in our society at large, and so the vast majority of Muslims on college campuses and do not have dedicated prayer spaces of their own that are large enough to accommodate the Jummah audience.
Omar Bajwa is a Muslim chaplain at Yale. Universities across the country have encountered difficulties with holding the Islamic Friday service in a chapel. At Emory, a custodian moves all the chairs and a large cross at their chapel in preparation for the Islamic Friday service. At the University of Arizona Banner Hospital's chapel, no more than 5 people can pray next to each other. The pews would get in the way. But at Yale, Bajwa says they found a way to make it work. Yale holds Friday service every week at the Dwight Chapel.
It's all open. There's no fixed pews. We have these beautiful wooden chairs that are totally mobile. So that's ideal for us in so many ways.
Yale's Dwight Chapel can hold up to 150 people for Jummah. Bajwa says chapels are great spaces to hold Jummah.
There's a natural affinity, right? That you have a dedicated sacred space on campus or such as a chapel. I think that it shows a partnership, right? A religious partnership and collaboration.
Back at Columbia, Lena Demas, the Muslim Students Association board member, says, unlike Yale, the pews are fixed and little can be done to open up the space. She doesn't want to sound ungrateful, but having a religious service in a space that wasn't designed for you is hard.
If the pews weren't there, we'd have more space and more people would show up. And it would also just feel more appropriate for us.
And until Muslims at the Columbia Medical Center find a new space, they'll continue to stumble through the pews of the Milstein Chapel during Friday service. Hiba Ansari, Columbia Radio News.
Another issue that Muslim and Jewish students often face is accessing food that fits their diets. Last year, New York City launched a 1-year pilot program to provide halal and kosher lunches across the city. Over 1/3 of all public school students in New York City are Muslim or Jewish, though it is unknown how many restrict their diet to halal and kosher food.
The current program is still limited to 10 schools, and the city has no concrete plans to expand the program. Scooty Nickerson reports on how some families are calling for publicly funded halal and kosher meal plans in all New York schools.
For the last 20 years, parent Mazeda Udin has pressured education officials, City Hall, and even the mayor to provide kosher and halal food at public schools across New York City. Udin says that the program's expansion is especially critical in low-income areas of the city.
I know a couple of parents, they work 3-4 times shift of job. When they come home, they see their children is hungry. What they should have to do?
These questions are not abstract for Udin. After immigrating to America, Udin worked long hours just to make ends meet. At one point, her financial situation grew so desperate that she had to start babysitting local children for $1.50 an hour. And as a practicing Muslim, Udin also had to pay for her own kids' food because her public school did not provide halal. Paying for her own kids' food on top of everything else was sometimes just too much to handle. Udin says that she's been disheartened by the city's slow response to her efforts and is considering reaching out to celebrities to help fund the lunch program.
I am thinking to Bill Gates, Oprah, and to Apple guy to write a letter. Please contribution this much amount money to the school so that they can have a halal and kosher food. I am thinking that way.
After working as a parent organizer for over a decade, Udin formed the South Asian Fund for Parent Scholarship and Training, or SAFEST, in 2015 to bring organizational strength to her push for reform. Udin says that she gets calls regularly from parents wondering when the kosher and halal program will be expanded.
They keep calling me. They're talking to me. Oh, you bought the halal food. Where is halal food? I said, I don't know.
And it's not just Udin who is hearing about the need for halal and kosher food. 21 Muslim and Jewish religious leaders across New York City signed an open letter to Mayor Bill de Blasio in 2017 urging him to expand the program. And for the last few years, Udin has also worked alongside New York State Assemblyman David Weprin on a statewide kosher food program. Wetburn co-signed a bill this summer which would provide kosher and halal food to all New York schools with over 500 Muslim or Jewish students. But here's the thing. Wetburn proposed a similar bill 2 years ago, and it never went up for a vote. Wetburn says part of the problem is that City Hall doesn't want to spend more money.
We get pushback from New York City every time because they're talking about the cost. It's always an issue of money.
Even if progress has been slow, Wetburn sees one clear silver lining to the fight for kosher and halal. It has united both Jewish and Muslim New Yorkers.
One of the wonderful things about this whole issue is it's really united the Muslim and Jewish community. We don't always partner on that many things, and it's a wonderful thing to see.
Though the future of halal and kosher food remains uncertain, Udine plans to continue knocking on doors and rallying support for the issue. Scooty Nickerson, Columbia Radio News.
New York City is a densely packed forest of metal and glass, which can raise temperatures to dangerous levels. All that metal and glass reflects sunlight, which magnifies the heat's effects, especially in low-income neighborhoods.
More than 600 New Yorkers die each year from heat-related causes. And with little room to expand green space on the streets, a new law has local politicians looking up, towards the city's roofs. However, as Brian Edwards reports, these efforts to increase rooftop green spaces have yet to reach the neighborhoods most in need.
In low-income areas, like parts of Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, a lack of air conditioning, limited green space, and poor insulation make scalding summer temperatures a serious health risk. The working-class neighborhood is also home to Thread Collective, an architecture firm that designs buildings with sustainable roofs to mitigate those effects. Whenever she can, founder Elliot Maltby brings customers to the top of her building to show them her own green roof.
So we are seeing what looks like mostly a bunch of dead grass.
Her green roof is less of a lush jungle and more of a browning, shrubbery-filled prairie. She describes the aesthetic as something out of a Dr. Seuss book. It isn't enough to simply put plants on the roof. Instead, they need to be grown within a layer of dirt on top of the building. Across the city, Maltby has installed many green roofs like her own.
I would say we've proposed one. Probably every time we've done a building that could have one.
Advocates say there aren't enough. The city is trying to force the issue. The new law, which went into effect last month, now requires new or renovated buildings to have a green roof, solar panels, or mini wind turbines. It's part of New York's plan to reduce its carbon footprint, lower dangerous temperatures, and reduce stormwater drainage issues. Here's New York City Councilman Rafael Espinal, the author of the bill.
When I introduced this law, it was seen as a dream, right? How do you transform a city that we've known as a concrete jungle to now a green oasis, 10, 20, 30 years from down the line?
That transformation is taking place. City data from 2016 shows an upward trend of green roofs in Manhattan. The Jacob K. Javits Center in Hell's Kitchen is home to the city's biggest green roof, which is nearly 7 acres, but it hasn't reached low-income areas like Bushwick where it's needed. The unequal concentration of green roofs in the city is likely because wealthy building owners have been able to take advantage of a city grant which matches funds for green roofs. Developers of affordable housing aren't installing them at the same rate.
I believe that the incentive exists, and the city has done a good job at creating these incentives. Where we failed is pushing developers to do this.
There are some concerns. Developers in the city opposed the efforts when they were introduced to the council. The Real Estate Board of New York declined to set up an interview for this story. In hearings on the bill, the group said the plan was too costly for many building owners, and the heavy layer of dirt needed for green roofs isn't feasible for some buildings with weak structures. They can cost twice as much as a traditional roof to install initially, though much of the upfront spending evens out over the life of the roof because they're more energy efficient. The real estate group did praise the city's efforts to become more green. Espinal thinks there's a middle ground.
Developers' main concern is their bottom line and how much money they're spending, how much money they're saving. So when you remove the environmental benefits and talk about the fiscal benefits, they're more receptive to the idea.
It'll be decades before any tangible effects of the new law can be measured. Advocates have said they will reanalyze green roof data to track the new law's progress. And with city officials pledging to cut emissions 40% by 2040, they're hoping sustainable roofs will be a major contributor to their goal. Brian Edwards, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Sadia Rafiquddin.
And I'm Jamaris Perez. Next up, schools, drugs, and some very naughty Santas.
These stories and more coming up, but first, these headlines.
House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler released his committee's official recommendation that President Trump be impeached this afternoon. In the recommendation report, Nadler claimed that President Trump will, quote, remain a threat to national security if left in office. Earlier today, Chairman Nadler announced the articles of impeachment against President Trump at a news conference convened by top Democratic officials.
A president who declares himself above accountability, above the American people, and above Congress's power of impeachment, which is meant to protect against threats to our democratic institutions, is a president who sees himself as above the law. We must be clear.
The two charges leveled against the president accuse him of abuse of power and contempt of Congress. The House first launched the impeachment inquiry 6 weeks ago to investigate if President Trump pushed Ukrainian officials to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. Key to the Democrats' abuse of power charge is their contention that President Trump withheld military aid to Ukraine until a politically motivated investigation of Biden was launched. Trump is only the third president in American history to face impeachment charges. After the press conference concluded, President Trump tweeted "witch hunt" in all caps and accused Democratic Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff of corruption without citing any evidence. Trump is also expected to meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today to discuss the ongoing Russian-American relationship. The last time Lavrov visited the White House, President Trump ignited a political firestorm by telling him that he fired FBI Director James Comey over an investigation of his ties to Moscow. That discussion was part of the reason the original Russia inquiry was launched. In other news, House Democrats and President Trump reached an agreement over the multi-billion-dollar USMCA trade deal between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. The trade deal would revise the NAFTA compact first signed between the three countries during the Clinton administration. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the redrafted agreement will leave many Americans better off.
It makes all the difference in the world. To American workers, workers in Canada, workers in Mexico. It makes all the difference in the world in terms of the environmental issues.
Democrats say new labor and environmental protections written into the revised trade deal actually convinced them to change course and support the trade deal. Trump has long said that the old NAFTA agreement left workers behind across the country. This morning, he tweeted that the Democrats' change of course was, quote, very good for America. Finally, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary is also making headlines this morning for naming the pronoun they as their word of the year. The dictionary chose they as the word of the year because search rates for the term rose over 300% in the last year. Senior editor of Merriam-Webster, Emily Brewster, said in a statement that the term rose well over 300%. Scooty Nickerson, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Jamaris Perez.
And I'm Sadia Rafiquddin. There's a growing movement to racially diversify curriculums in New York City's public schools. Last year, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a $23 million investment to do just that. But some activists say it isn't enough. One group of parents is asking the mayor to dedicate an additional $60 million next year. Christina St. Louis has more on what they think those funds could accomplish.
In a recent report, the parents of the NYC Coalition for Educational Justice argue that language arts curriculums in New York City are Eurocentric. They say they're a disservice to students of color. That's 85% of the city's public school students. Angel Martinez is a member of the group and a parent of 3 NYC students. 65 years after Brown v. Board of Education, she says education in New York City still has a ways to go.
As woke as people want themselves to be, we are not. We are not in the position to say that we have really educated students to the best of our abilities. We have not. We fail them on a daily basis.
With $60 million, they think the city can make the curriculums more culturally responsive.
We've essentially stated that culturally responsive education is providing a student with a quality education that centers them in their classroom, their identities, their culture, and most of all, their contributions to this country.
The coalition reviewed nearly 1,200 books used in elementary and middle school classrooms and found that only about 200 of them were written by authors of color. Martinez says the $60 million wouldn't just help schools get new books, it could also pay for training teachers on how to implement them.
What we don't want is for the Department of Education or for the mayor to just give the money and it's like, now you have new curriculum so you can go be culturally responsive.
Martinez thinks the kids are ready for change too.
They've been more ready than the adults.
When students don't feel represented in the classroom, they turn to Google, and it affects more than just their learning process. Dr. Kalira Salas Ramirez is a professor of neuroscience at City College of New York. She's also on the Community Education Council for District 4. She says the content kids are exposed to in schools can have a lasting neurological impact.
The adolescent brain goes through some significant changes. And again, when you don't have some of these resources and there's trauma that comes along with having the lack of culturally responsive education for children, it can dramatically impact neural development during adolescence.
An advocate for culturally responsive education herself, she's heard a number of objections to it. Salas Ramirez says some people are concerned that if the curriculum changes, their own culture won't be included.
A lot of people think that all of a sudden the whole curriculum is going to be about Latinx and Black history. And they don't really understand that when we're talking about culturally responsive and sustainable education, it's to have a curriculum that really embraces every single ethnicity that we see in New York City.
De Blasio has not yet responded to the coalition's call for increased funding for culturally responsive education, but its members hope to see him make a monetary commitment during his State of the City address early next year. Christina San Luis, Columbia Radio News.
Now, more on New York schools. A new bill introduced to the New York State Legislature could add to the list of reasons students are allowed to miss school. The bill would change the language of state education law to add time off for mental health as an excused absence. The goal of the bill, according to its sponsor, is to help eliminate the stigma around seeking help for mental illness, especially in minority communities. Lauren Peace reports.
Discussion around mental health has gained momentum over the last decade, and for good reason. Data by the Center for Disease Control shows anxiety and depression among adolescents is at an all-time high.
Some days it's just so difficult to even get out of bed in terms of like depression. Some days it's so difficult to hold a presentation in terms of anxiety, speaking from both sides.
That's Scarlett Gonzalez, an 18-year-old high school student from the Bronx. She says she's struggled with anxiety and depression since the 5th grade.
There's been times where I finish a presentation and I need to leave the room right away because I'm going to start crying.
Gonzalez is one of a large community of first-generation Americans living in the Bronx. Her family immigrated from the Dominican Republic when she was 5. She says there's a negative stigma against emotional difficulty in the Dominican community. And when she first told her parents about her depression, instead of seeking treatment, they wanted her to turn to religion and pray.
It's just something that I don't think will help me the way it helped my parents growing up, or at least my mom. But it's been hard breaking it to her that even though I tried, it didn't help.
A new bill introduced by New York State Assemblywoman Natalia Fernandez is aiming to change that. Farhad Rahman is the communications director for the Assemblywoman.
We're hoping that the bill would sort of open the doors to the conversation.
Rahman says the bill won't necessarily increase the number of excused absences a student can take, but adding specific language about mental health will help normalize and legitimize the issue.
Hopefully these can sort of break those stigmas down and allow for students to not only have conversations with their parents, but also get the support in seeking the help that they need.
The proposed bill comes at the heel of a similar one passed in Oregon earlier this year, and support so far has been pretty consistent. In a community Facebook page, the consensus was that the bill is a good idea. Out of more than 100 responses, only 3 people were against it, questioning whether or not kids today are just whinier than those of past generations. Douglas Menon, a professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University, said that science shows otherwise.
I think people thought, well, maybe it's just that people today are more likely to say that they're anxious or depressed. But there's been good research out there that shows that there is actually increased levels in this cohort.
Menon says there are a variety of factors that have led to the increase, including social media and greater competition in school. So, is a bill that changes language the answer? Menon says it's not a one-fix solution. But
I think it's important to make space for that on a policy level. Otherwise, it becomes hard to implement that change.
as for Scarlett Gonzalez, she says she's beginning to access the support that she needs. This morning, she missed class for the first time to visit a therapist.
My parents are becoming more understanding the more they see that it's getting harder. Because I was able to push through for many years, and the fact that it's all crashing down in a way is kind of like a reality check for them and for me.
The fate of the bill will be determined when state session resumes in early January. It's expected to move out of the Education Subcommittee and be voted on early next year. Lauren Peace, Columbia Radio News.
The potential medicinal benefits of psychedelic drugs has garnered more attention in recent years. One recent study found that MDMA, or ecstasy, helped reduce symptoms in 2/3 of patients with PTSD. Psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, has been tested in clinical trials for managing addiction, depression, and even end-of-life anxiety among cancer patients.
Despite promising results, Megan Cattell reports, researchers in New York City face resistance in academia for pursuing the study of psychedelics.
Since childhood, Christy Strongman says she wanted to be a therapist. However, while pursuing a master's degree at Columbia University Teachers College in clinical counseling, she faced some challenges. When presenting her research on therapy and psychedelics one day, she didn't get the reaction any student would want.
As soon as my first slide went up, the professor laughed. And I looked at her and I said, "Why are you laughing?" I felt humiliated. I felt angry.
Strongman's story is not unique. Therapists in training say they face setbacks when exploring the topic of psychedelics in universities.
It's not popular at all, and I have felt very stigmatized.
Psychedelics became stigmatized during the 1960s and 70s. The U.S. government banned recreational use and federally funded studies after reports of drug-induced psychotic episodes caused widespread panic. Now, psychedelics can only be studied in controlled settings with approval by the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Caroline Dorson, a nurse practitioner at NYU, has studied plant-based psychedelics for the last 6 years. She says the research around such drugs is still in its infancy. Many in her field remain skeptical because standards around dosages, side effects, and long-term use have yet to be determined.
We desperately need really high-quality, rigorous scientific research on safety and efficacy. We don't want to suggest a powerful tool like this to someone that then could have an adverse reaction.
Despite the stigma around psychedelics used in psychiatry, Dorson is hopeful the research-backed benefits will change more minds in academia.
As soon as people start reading the research, they are usually swayed that this is something that deserves scientific attention. For example, there was a study done at Johns Hopkins looking at the impact of psilocybin on tobacco cessation. And it was incredibly effective. About 80% of people in this study stopped smoking cigarettes. And they actually followed people for 3 years out, and it was still 80%, which is extraordinary because we don't have any treatments for nicotine addiction that are even close to being as efficacious as that.
The FDA says psychedelics have no medical use, a barrier to conducting research. Current studies rely on private funding, but trials for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD patients is on the fast track to potential legalization. Experts say that the drug could be approved for therapeutic use by 2021. Megan Cattell, Columbia Radio News.
The number of home health aides in New York City has increased by 14% in the last year and is expected to keep rising. These aides assist chronically ill patients in their homes. Traditionally, patients are randomly assigned an aide through their healthcare provider. Part of the recent increase in home health aides is because of a 2016 initiative called the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. The program lets chronically ill patients that need at-home care choose their aides. Even family members and relatives can be paid to care for their loved ones. Abigail Brown reports.
Consumer Directed started in New York City in the early 90s as a test program. It was expanded nationwide in 1996. When the program first started in the 90s, consumers could pay any relative, excluding spouses and parents, to care for them. But in 2016, the program was changed to include parents of adult children over 21. 43-year-old Queens native Valerie Joseph found out about the program 3 years ago. She had many randomly assigned aides throughout her life, and some she didn't get along with. Joseph was able to ask 2 aides she knows she works well with to join her through the program and be her full-time caretakers. Joseph has used a wheelchair since she was a child, but she began needing extra assistance a few years ago after developing neuropathy that reduced her ability to use her hands. She added her mother, Monique Cuba, as an aide 2 months ago.
I was dealing with a lot of personalities, and I have a strong personality myself. It was hard.
To qualify for the consumer-directed program, consumers must be on Medicaid. Low-income families like Joseph and her mother use time they need to spend earning money to make ends meet caring for disabled loved ones. Since the program was expanded in 2016, more family members can get paid for taking care of relatives and don't need to lose out on valuable income. Home health aides require no certification or specific training and are prepped by the patient for their individual needs. For Cuba, the money is just a bonus.
So for me, I don't look at it the monetary value. I just figure that at least I know that she's been taken care of when the people are not there, and I also have to plan my time, because if I'm going to help her, I cannot go out. But if they don't come and I have things to do, I have to cancel.
The average day for a home health aide is a lot of work, early mornings and late nights. Sometimes when Joseph, who works full-time, gets home late, her aides have gone for the day. This means Joseph's nighttime preparations fall on her mother. So when the family learned about the ability to pay parents through the program, it made sense.
I said, okay, I'm not going to ask anybody else. She's here with me. I live in her home. I live in the basement. She lives upstairs. So it's privacy enough that I could say, okay, I can have my own space and still have the help.
The average annual income for a home health aide is a little more than $20,000. Aides hired through the program are paid through a third party and make minimum wage. Earlier this year, the state proposed budget cuts to the program. Multiple disability advocacy groups sued the commissioner and Department of Health to prevent the cuts and won. Brian O'Malley, executive director of one of the organizations involved in the lawsuit, says the program is not any better than a regular home health aide position. It just gives the patients more autonomy.
I think the hours are long and the pay's not great. Folks can get paid what the state allocates in funding and makes available in funding.
O'Malley said there isn't just one reason for the increase in home health aides in New York City. It's a combination of baby boomers getting old and looking to stay in their homes longer, and consumers finding out about and wanting to take advantage of the program, giving them more freedom and comfort. Abigail Brown, Columbia Radio News.
For doctors, there are professional guidelines for everything. These recommendations help doctors prescribe medication, run blood tests, decide between imaging techniques, and even inform how doctors think about certain diseases. But on social media, no such recommendations exist, and the free-for-all is something the medical community is struggling with.
On Instagram, for example, a growing number of doctors in visual fields like dermatology publicly display partnerships with makeup lines, cosmetic procedures, and more. While some doctors say it's a fun way to endorse their favorite products, others say it crosses professional boundaries. Rasna Neelam reports.
Hadley King is a dermatologist in Manhattan, but she has a second career. She's a social media influencer. On her Instagram page, King's 4,300 followers scroll through colorful pictures of her walking red carpet events, doing yoga, and holding up tubes of skin products. King is paid to promote L'Oreal acne products, a powdered sunscreen called Brush on Block, and even a face mask from the brand Wrinkles Schminkles. But she says she only sponsors content she can really get behind.
Because that way, everything I'm saying is true. So I genuinely like the products. I look at the ingredients and these ingredients that I think are good.
According to King, there are tons of positives to promoting products on Instagram. She says she gets to see a different side of medicine, the money's nice, and social media is just plain fun. According to research done in USA Today, industry standard is $1,000 per post for every 100,000 followers. King isn't quite in that ballpark, although her professional status as a doctor may alter these numbers. But despite all the positives, there's a downside as well.
Say it's a brand that I think is really wonderful, But now, because I'm a partner, maybe people don't believe that I really do love them that much. They think, oh, she's biased because she's working with them.
Search for a dermatologist on Instagram, and you'll find that many doctors may be facing the same dilemma. Pages of physicians' accounts appear, most with thousands of followers and sponsored content. Dr. Arthur Kaplan is the director of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Health. He agrees with King's concerns that patients may think she's biased. He doesn't believe doctors should promote sponsored products at all.
It damages people's trust when they think you're just out there using your physician training to endorse products. That isn't what medicine is for. I think that's misusing your role and cheapening it, in fact, just to be a marketing advantage.
Additionally, Kaplan says these posts may get confused with all the beauty influencers already on social media. Despite his strong opinions, consensus is hard to find. Dr. Allison Bateman House works in the same division of medical ethics as Kaplan, but she has a completely different opinion.
I don't think it matters if I would ideally say doctors should not sponsor products, because it's going to happen. No one, that genie is out of the box. The question is, how do we make sure that it's done in the best way possible? So I think the transparency in terms of here's what I'm getting out of this, and then also is holding yourself accountable to not promoting things that you know don't work or that you know could be harmful.
Is there a happy medium? Not yet. Kaplan says he's still hoping for guidelines that specifically help the many doctors joining Instagram determine acceptable and unacceptable behavior when it comes to sponsoring products. As for Hadley King, the dermatologist, she says she just bought a camera to start creating educational video blogs. Rasna Neelam, Columbia Radio News.
In the late 1900s, New York-based Puerto Ricans, or Nuyorican, dominated Avenue C's population. The street was dubbed Loisaida, a Latin pronunciation of Lower East Side.
But the neighborhood has changed. Artists and bohemians were attracted to the lower rent prices. NYU students and postgraduates moved east. With them came a surge of hot restaurants, bars, and clubs. Kayla Bamberger reports on how, despite the gentrification, one local restaurant has stood the test of time.
Casa Adela, a Nuyorican restaurant on Avenue C, was established over 40 years ago. Abigail Fargas, the late Adela's daughter, says the reason it's still in business is simple.
We don't try to be a fancy restaurant.
In the script on the front door, Casa Adela advertises authentic Puerto Rican cuisine. Inside, the smell of rotisserie chicken permeates the cramped space. Colorful art, including a bright painting of the nation's flag, plaster the walls. Spanish soap operas and newscasts play on the TV, loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear.
Every time that people come in here, what they're going to hear is the TV. And every time that you go in a family house, what you see on. So that's why we call this restaurant Casa Adela, because it's a home.
Casa Adela was, and still is, adored for its rotisserie chicken.
I live around the corner, and so I always come around here for a quick bite. My go-to is the chicken with fried plantains.
That's a common refrain among customers. But Fargas says she's modified the menu to accommodate new patrons, including vegetarians.
We try to get everybody happy. We used to make the bean with pork, pig, and most of the customers that we have in there don't eat that, so we eliminate all that.
Flores Forbes, an economic development expert who assists local businesses, says restaurants need to change with their neighborhoods.
We have a vegan population, and do you have beans with meat? Well, I mean, the first thing could have wrong, they could have said, we're a Puerto Rican restaurant, this is our cultural food, and so we're not going to change. So I think that they have to adapt.
Outside the East Village, Forbes describes similar adjustments at a Harlem restaurant, Sylvia's, too.
I was talking to Kenny Woods, the owner of Sylvia's restaurant, and he told me the same thing, that there's mostly traditional soul food, which has a lot of pork and maybe fatty foods. And he's like, well, we make greens now with turkey.
With these changes, Casa Adela and Sylvia's have made the numbers work and kept their locations. But not all restaurants can balance the books.
The highest fixed cost for most restaurants is their rent. Usually how you compile that is you have a certain amount of covers in terms of servings that you make. that will make, your fixed costs, your payroll, and your other bills, right? So, but what happens first is you can't stop paying people. So you stop paying the rent.
But for Casa Adela, the things that make it unique, like its historical location, have stayed the same. And so has one important recipe.
Has the rotisserie chicken changed?
Never.
Casa Adela is open daily from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Kayla Bamberger, Columbia Radio News.
It's been a deadly year in the city for pedestrians and cyclists. So far, 28 cyclists have been killed by vehicles. This is a problem that New York City member Idanis Rodriguez wants to solve. He's chair of the city's Transportation Committee. To solve this problem, he proposed legislation last month to form an Office of Pedestrians. He's also supporting a new proposal to create an Office of Active Transportation. The goal is for both to work in tandem to advocate for the safety of the city's pedestrians and cyclists. I spoke with Tomas Garrida, Director of Communications for Councilmember Rodriguez, about these new offices. They'll be reviewed at a public hearing next week. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Councilmember Rodriguez introduced a bill last month to create an Office of Pedestrians. Doesn't the Department of Transportation already have oversight of these issues? What would be new here?
We're finally going to have someone that's going to be making policy recommendations, but also keeping the priority of cyclists and pedestrians. And a lot of the things that we are trying to do with safety sometimes get slowed down because of bureaucracy or just the amount of time that it takes. And in these two offices, we're hoping that it's going to speed up that process so we don't see the long wait times that we are currently seeing.
So why now? Safety concerns are ongoing. Is this too late?
New York City is behind. We're really trying to work with the timeline that we have, and unfortunately we can't go back in time, but we're really hoping that we can prevent any more deaths from happening.
There are a couple of ways these offices could be led, either by appointment by Mayor de Blasio or by the head of an agency. What would you say to concerns that these offices might not have the independence to act effectively?
It's up to the electeds and the transportation advocates to hold them accountable.
And what does accountability look like?
The office is going to be made up of different advocates, different city agencies, as well as some community boards and residents. But so we're really trying to kind of diversify the way that the office is going to be set up.
So what is your timeline? Looking ahead to the public hearing on December 16th, what should New Yorkers expect?
So we're definitely going to be urging all advocates and all New Yorkers who would like to have a say in what is occurring to show up to the December 16th hearing, because this is an opportunity for the public to come and testify and show why an office like this would be very helpful for the city. And so in terms of the timeline, once we hold the hearing, we're going to be hopefully expecting either one more hearing or just go to the vote so that we can get all stakeholders, part of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Tomas. I really appreciate the time you've taken with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Anyone who's ventured to Midtown this time of year knows just how congested the area around Rockefeller Center can get. Up to 20,000 pedestrians walk through each hour during the holidays to catch a glimpse of the famous Christmas tree. And that's why city officials say they put a new holiday street plan in Midtown Manhattan into effect.
Cars and trucks are now banned on 49th and 50th Streets during the afternoons and evenings. The plan gives more space to pedestrians visiting sites like the Christmas tree, but restricting access to vehicles can also hold back people with disabilities. And Margaret Warner brings us this report.
It's Midtown in mid-December. There are tourists bundled in scarves and puffy coats, Salvation Army volunteers with donation buckets and jingling bells, and now, around Rockefeller Center, barricades. Lots and lots of barricades. Their purpose? Keep vehicles out. Lisa Carey works in Midtown and is enjoying the extra space on 50th Street to view the Christmas tree.
I think it's amazing. I think it's great that there's no cars around. People don't have to worry about all that traffic.
But the plan has also forced crosstown buses to be rerouted to avoid the closures on 49th and 50th Streets. Susan Duha is the executive director of Center for Independence of the Disabled New York. She says that when a bus stop is moved 2 blocks, it can make an already difficult navigation even harder for a disabled person.
What for us is a few steps might for them feel like a mile or more. And that is an unfair imposition upon them.
Dua doesn't want to be a Grinch about the plan. She's focused on inclusivity for everyone.
We believe that this will make it much more difficult for people with disabilities to be integrated in the kind of fun and holiday cheer that's available at Rockefeller Center.
Some of that holiday cheer includes an ice skating rink and a towering Christmas tree. Jerome Barth is president of the Fifth Avenue Association, a business improvement district which represents economic interests in the area. He's aware of concern around altering bus routes.
I think yes, it certainly can be an inconvenience for people, particularly if you have difficulties with mobility, to have to change your route. But there's also a chance that maybe even your route is actually more convenient to you.
Barth's association worked in coordination with the mayor's office, the Department of Transportation, and Tishman Speyer, the landlord at neighboring Rockefeller Center, to establish a street plan that would accommodate the increase in pedestrians in the area. Barth took me on an evening walking tour of Fifth Avenue.
You can see here, we can see this is a solid wall of people, probably 8 to 12 people deep on the west side of the street, both people walking by and people making their way onto 50th Street. So it's extremely crowded here. And
when we turn the corner onto 50th Street, a police cruiser blocks the entrance. There are concrete barricades preventing cars from entering. Jerome Barth says he thinks Tishman Speyer is interested in closing 49th and 50th Street permanently. The real estate group was not available for an interview and declined to provide a comment. For now, the holiday street plan will be in place until early January. Anne Margaret Warner, Columbia Radio News.
Over 50,000 lights decorate the Rockefeller Christmas tree, and while holiday lights are pretty to look at, there may be an unintended consequence: light pollution. All over America, big cities are contributing to the problem. As one of the biggest cities, New York's outdoor holiday lights are a huge attraction, but the extra lighting can be just as harmful as it is beautiful. Caitlin Antonios reports.
New Yorkers know it's holiday season when the trees stripped bare from the cold get a bright upgrade and storefronts turn red and green. Even tiny apartment buildings are transformed with lights wrapped around balconies and entryways. Daniela Evans, an elementary school teacher, says she doesn't have enough space in her Harlem apartment to decorate, a problem lots of New Yorkers have. But one thing they do have space for is lights.
I don't have lights that are on the outside of my house, but I have lights that I display in the windows during the holidays.
Do you use the same Christmas lights that you use every year, or do you buy new lights and change up your decoration?
I keep the same ones. I've had them for a long time. They're sort of like nice memories, like the tradition of having the same stuff.
Outdoor lighting costs about $10 billion per year in the U.S., according to the U.S. Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. During the holidays, that number increases by 30 to 50%. One solution for people would be to swap their lights for ones that are more efficient, but for many people, like Evans, there's an emotional connection to bringing out the lights they store in boxes each year, and the problem isn't putting up lights or switching them, it's keeping them on.
I usually keep them on all night unless I'm going out of town or something. I know it's not like the most efficient, but it's something that makes it's like a holiday kind of thing.
It's hard to think about the environmental effect of holiday lights when they're only displayed a few weeks out of the year, but each little light adds up to something much bigger. Diane Turnchik is an astronomer at Carnegie Mellon University who studies the way light enters the atmosphere when it's turned on.
If something is not shielded and scatters light upwards towards the heavens, it's wasted light, but it's also adding to sky glow, which doesn't do anybody any good.
Sky glow makes it difficult to study stars, night patterns, and disrupts the natural cycle of nocturnal animals. Drastic change in outdoor lighting in the past 100 years is not long enough for most nocturnal animals and plants to adapt, Turnchik said. But it also affects the human health. Blue-tone light has been linked to melatonin suppression, making it difficult to sleep at night. Most phones and electronics have started to shift to warmer-toned light, but outdoor LED lights have not made that change.
We're aware of a lot of environmental problems, but light pollution is one of those that escapes notice. It's not something that directly impacts people immediately, like a flood and a drought, but it's something that over time can seriously affect people.
But that doesn't mean there can't be holiday lights.
It's so easy to fix. That's the thing. It's like, water pollution and soil pollution, they're really hard to fix. But light pollution, you just turn the lights off, you're done.
Turnchick hopes that in the near future, people won't have to drive over an hour outside of the city to see the Milky Way. With more community awareness to only use light when necessary, that road trip could only be 20 minutes. Caitlin Antonios, Columbia Radio News.
Finally today, a story about some bad Santas.
That's right. New York City's annual SantaCon is this weekend. Starting Saturday morning, thousands will swarm the city dressed as Santas, naughty elves, and raucous reindeer. However, costumes are just secondary to the main activity, drinking. The crew of rowdy revelers will hop through dozens of bars across all 5 boroughs.
Every December, the holiday hooligans invade cities across the country. Last Saturday, Hoboken hosted its annual SantaCon. New Yorkers are famous for their hatred of the raucous crowds at SantaCon, but Hoboken's event can be way more trouble. Grace Goodwin braved the mayhem to bring us this report.
It's early afternoon in Hoboken, and the skies are blue. On River Street, the brick buildings and small cafe patios feel like a small-town Main Street. But you'd think it was midnight in Las Vegas. The street is home to many bars, the Dubliner, the Texas Arizona, Mike's Wild Moose Saloon. Lines of people stretch down the block outside each one. Oh, and everyone's dressed like Santa Claus. Many are also drunk. David Ostachier is leaning against a car and smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, we drank a 36-pack every year. We have tradition. We meet up at 8 a.m., we start a 36-pack. At exactly 9:15, we get in the car, drink a couple more beers before we get here, and then we go in.
Ostachier has been to New York's SantaCon, but he prefers Hoboken's. He says here the people are friendlier and the bars are closer together. A few blocks away, the Mad Hatter Bar is packed with over 100 dancing Santas. A DJ blares remixes to popular Christmas songs. The floors are glistening with spilled beer and littered with plastic cups and discarded Santa hats. Outside, a large group of Santas is scarfing down slices of pizza.
We've seen a lot of weird shit.
Public shaming, breakups.
I saw people peeing on the street, pooping on the street. I saw everything.
Pee on someone else in the streets.
One member of the group, Grayson Clark, already got a ticket for having an open container. His is one of dozens of summonses issued throughout the day in Hoboken. Hoboken's SantaCon is 1/3 the size of New York's, yet it typically sees 3 times as many arrests. In recent years, there's been growing criticism of the event. Some have even called for it to be canceled. Marisol Hernandez, who works in a quiet family restaurant nearby, is one critic.
It's a shame because, I have a small child. And, he's crazy about Santa Claus and all this and that. I don't want to take my child today to see all these, Santa Clauses, throwing up on the street, on the sidewalk, getting drunk, getting wasted. That's not the picture I want to, I want my son to see.
Like Hernandez, Anthony Romano is all too familiar working amid the chaos. He's a retired police captain. It used to be his job to prep police officers for the day. Now he's more focused on maintaining his family's bar nearby, which gets trashed every year.
And it's gotten much, much better. This year seems to be very mild compared to last year.
Romano's right. By the end of the day, about half as many arrests were made as in previous years, and half as many people attended. Still, there were 8 arrests, 20 people were transported to the hospital, and over 500 calls for police assistance were made. With 160 police officers on duty, the police chief estimates the event cost taxpayers $75,000. By now, though, the vomit has been cleaned from Hoboken's streets. But across the Hudson, New Yorkers are starting to get nervous for their upcoming SantaCon. Michael Murray is head bartender at the Liberty in Midtown.
I'd say there's definitely a certain degree of mental preparation involved. When it happens hard.
Murray says he wants to pull his hair out on SantaCon, but he says there's also a silver lining. He goes home at the end of the day with a lot of cash and some funny stories. Grace Goodwin, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Brian Edwards. Keeping their ears on every piece were senior producer Abigail Brown and assistant producer Eric He.
Interview producers Ann Margaret Warner and Hiba Ansari coordinated our conversations. Senior editor Ian Hodgson and assistant editor Caleb Bamberger made our words good.
Director Christina San-Louis coordinated our studio production with Lauren Peace and Megan Cattell.
Our web team, Caitlin Antonios and Rusna Neelam, got this stream live to the web. Scooty Nickerson and Grace Goodwin produced the news.
Our instructors, Sally Herships and Zakia Gibbons, advised our staff. I'm Sadia Rafiquddin.
And I'm Jamaris Perez. Until next time, you can find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.